Hello guys and welcome to the second video of this week. So just like in the case of Skinner in the last week, we will be dividing this new school of thought or this new school of learning into parts. So this week we will cover like the first part and then we will continue in the next one and we will finish with another exercise, okay? So we are going to work in this session with Ausubel's meaningful learning theory. Okay, this is from the 65, and it was written, of course, well, not only written by experience and research and everything that involves the developing of a theory by David Ausubel. Okay, it's very important that we catch the essentiality of this theory, as it is pretty common in education that we use the word meaningful and meaningful learning, and that some learning is meaningful, and I mean this word is used in so many different ways and so many incorrect ways, as empathy has been used in the pandemics, right? Like everybody just uses in whatever convenient way is good for him or her or them, right? Well, it's a good occasion for us to understand exactly what do we mean by meaningful when we're dealing with educational processes, right? If we go to that slide, to that number 20, you will see an initial let's say quote by Ausubel that I think that it's the most essential part. I think that we can study a lot of what Ausubel proposes in meaningful learning, but this, if you're going to remember one thing, remember this, right? Let's take a look at what he says. It says the most important single factor influencing learning is what the learner already knows. Ascertain this and teach him accordingly, right? So we are not empty deposits, right? Human beings, by what Ausubel proposes, are not a clean slate, are not a void paper, are not an empty jar or an empty bucket. We always know something in advance, even if the topic is completely new. Yes, we're going to be able to either have some minimum knowledge about it, we have heard somebody speaking about it, we have watched a movie, we have watched a video, listened to a song, whatever that has at least a remote connection with this topic, right? And this is a little bit what I did starting this course. I asked you really difficult questions, very complex questions about neural impulses, learning techniques, somehow problems with accidents, with brain accidents, how do infants learn? Well, very complex questions, but many of you were able to provide really accurate questions, accurate answers, right? Or guesses or whatever. And even the ones who were a little bit far away from the correct answer, for them it was possible to say something, yes, because they have a previous knowledge. And that takes us to the first sentence on the left of the slide, which complements this, yes, and it's relating new events or items to already existing concepts or propositions. That is really essentially what we have. Meaningful learning has to do with using what I already know, yes, in order to create new knowledge, right? To acquire new concepts, to amplify such concepts, to make them more complex, to somehow complete them, or to formulate theories, or to formulate hypotheses, I would say, at a school level, and all these different things. So basically this meaningful learning deals with not starting from scratch, not starting from zero, but always like having some sort of connection over there, right? With previous or former knowledge. Now we have a quote in here that seems to be a little bit complex. Let me read it for you, and then we will analyze it little by little. Yes. So meaning is not an implicit response. It means that somehow the meaning of a word, of a term, or let's say the explanation of a concept is not necessarily implicit. It is not the origin of it is not on the concept itself, isolated, separated from other things, but, and let's take a look at the quote, clearly articulated and precisely differentiated experience that emerge from potentially meaningful things, symbols, concepts are related to and incorporated within a given individual's cognitive structure on a non-arbitrary and substantive basis. Okay, so again, we seem to have a very fancy and complicated definition that is not that much, right? So let's start with the first two things. Yes, it says that clearly, the meaning is clearly articulated and precisely differentiated. So what does it mean clearly articulated? That it is related to other ideas or to other concepts. So if I am going to define didactics or pedagogy, it is definitely connected to some other concepts that I already know. Yes? You are going to define that, so you're required to know the connotations of teaching, the connotations of academics, the connotations and the implicit definitions of some other concepts, right? So somehow a concept is never isolated, yes? According to Ausubel and his meaningful learning theory, everything is connected somehow, and I am unable to define, understand, and use a certain concept, and of course develop learning about it, if that is isolated, if that has no connection, right? So that is the articulated part. But then it also says precisely differentiated. Yes, and what does it mean? It means that no matter how similar one concept is to another, and no matter how many connections it has, well, if it is a concept, it is supposed to be unique and individual and has its own identity, right? So a bicycle is somehow similar to a motorcycle, yes, but each one of them, even though the similarities and both are transportation means and they have both two wheels and they have a steering and well, a lot of different things that are similar, like the chain and some other ones, well, each one of them is a different concept, yes? So even though they are articulated, they are close to one another, each of them has its own identity, yes? Now, so this meaning emerges from experience, right? Like I am able to identify a motorcycle or a bike because I have an experience, a former experience about them. I have seen them, I have maybe rode them, a relative or a friend or somebody has a motorcycle and I was able to be in touch with it, or I saw them in a movie. Experience is really important over here. Yes, and this differentiation, yes, this articulation but differentiation, that is a simultaneous process, like this is similar to this but it is different in this. It emerges when meaningful signs, symbols, and concepts are related and incorporated within a given individual cognitive structure. So these signs and symbols can be, they sound fancy, but it could be something as simple as letters, as the alphabet, as, in order to, let's say, differentiate the brand of the motorcycle, for example, or to write the word motorcycle, or concepts such as combustion that is necessary for the movement of the motorcycle, or the concept of energy, or the concept of movement. Yes, all of them associated to transportation, right? So all of that, like, sort of work together, let's say, combine with one another. Yes, many of the times not necessarily consciously, Yes, let's say that every time that you somebody moving, you don't think about physics, uh, but actually physics is there, right? And they are somehow related into your experience, into each individual's experience and cognitive structure, right? So again, let's think a little bit about formas, yes, and how the cognitive component was important for describing your discourse. So the more you know about a certain topic, the better you're going to be able to define it. Think about that exercise that we used to do with the fly, right? So for you, if you don't know a lot about uh, technical things, so fly is either a verb or the animal, but you cannot really say if the animal has a particular taxonomy, such as an insect, a subclass, or something like that. How many legs does it have? How many pair of wings? Yes. So the more complex is your discourse, and the more complex your cognitive structure, meaning that you have had more knowledge in the past and more experience in the past, so you're going to be able to refine your concepts, and your meaning, your learning will be even more meaningful. Yes, because you're connecting more things, you're connecting more fields of knowledge. Yes. Well, this is done on a non-arbitrary and substantive basis, right? So let's say that it is non-arbitrary because you don't do this randomly. Yes, even though when you don't really think about these different things at the moment, it has been somehow continuously throughout your process of education and experience, building up until you are able to combine them unconsciously, right? So if again, if you see an airplane flying, so even though you don't remember what you learned about aerodynamics in physics, yes, you're combining with the information about transportation of movement and something of mechanics and maybe a little bit of geography because of the location and some simple things as the notion of color, shape, material. I mean, it's amazing how you can combine all these different things that seem to be like so separate at school. Yeah, that you had artistics education on one side and math on the other and language on the other and physical education on the other, and they never seem to be connected at the moment. No, like I worked a couple of years in a school in which we used to work by projects, and it was amazing to do that consciously, right? Like we all teachers talk to each other, and we have only one single final project for each bimester, and I mean it was sort of a lot of work, but at least for me it was great, like because the students like were able to see all the time the connection with one subject with the other, right? And that was really meaningful. Yes, for example, I remember that we did a project for global warming. Yes, I was a math teacher back then, and I contributed with the statistics, the interpretation of graphics, the interpretation of bar graphs and pie charts. And then the science teacher, I mean biology, had everything related to the concepts of global warming, and then the English teacher helped them prepare like their dissertation, their presentation, and then the art teacher helped them to do some let's say displayed materials with biodegradable things, I mean garbage and trash and things like that, and basically every single subject connected, and in the end we were like 6 or 7 teachers, and the students say, wow, really, like this is something meaningful somehow. Yes, well, maybe not all of them, but most of them at least had the chance to see that. So I consider that was really meaningful in Ausubelian let's say terms somehow, right? So now this relatability, I mean this connection of one thing with the other, with one concept with the other, with former knowledge with current knowledge, produces certain things. So if you take a look at the text in the end of the slide, it says that this relatability, causes acquisition of new meanings. It means knowledge. So when you acquire new meaning, that is basically creating knowledge. Retention, you are going to be likely to remember things better because they are connected, they are not isolated. So it's more likely that you can remember this in a better way. That's what I try to do when I say that I teach one thing in composition and then the other in formas, and now here in psycholinguistics. Probably when I mention you don't remember anything, but well, I try. Yeah. So yeah, there's this connection, and it's likely that you at least remember a little bit better. Psychological organization, hierarchical structure, right? Like you can be able to classify certain things and give importance or prioritize certain things better. Like for this task, I require this knowledge or this concept that I take from math, or that I take from language, or that I take from science, and this is more important for this particular task than for the next. Yes? So you're able to mentally create these hierarchies. Again, this may sound very systematic. And you will say, who does that? Like, nobody thinks about it. And that's the whole point. Yes? That you don't require to think about it because your knowledge is so integrated, so articulated, that you don't even think about these formal things. You just sort of do the thing automatically. And eventually this will lead to forgetting. Yes, and we will discuss about that, the forgetting, because let's say that there are some positive forgetting, some things that are okay to forget, and I'm not talking about your ex, I'm talking about something much more relevant for your life. It is certain things that you require to not pay so much attention to, and replace somehow by some other knowledge. But well, we will discuss about that next week. So hopefully this is clear enough. Let's say the basis of meaningful learning is the possibility of relating different fields of knowledge. Formal knowledge, such as the one that you can find on let's say the school, the university, or practical knowledge. I mean, people who doesn't know how to read or write can, of course, learn meaningfully, right? If they are able to connect their practices. They're let's say a person who is an electricist, and let's imagine that he doesn't know how to read or write, but if he has enough experience and know how to wire cables and know how the energy works, most likely he will be able to meaningfully learn when a difficult situation arises, or when somehow an unexpected problem arises, because he's able to relate previous experience with other concepts that he had from other contexts and that are not necessarily academic. Okay, very well. So if we go into the slide number 21, we are going to find like a contrast between meaningful learning, that is what Ausubel proposes, and rote learning. This rote learning, again, doing a very big simplification, will be memoristic learning. You know, learning things by heart, memorizing dates, memorizing facts, capitals of the world, I don't know, different things, right? So let's make a comparison over here, right? If you will see, it's basically the same. It is just that one of the columns presents a no, and the other one presented in a positive way. So let's take a look on the left. It says that meaningful learning. It's non-arbitrary, non-verbatim, substantive incorporation of new knowledge into cognitive structure. Okay, it's non-arbitrary because it is not, or is supposed not to be demanded or let's say forced into the student. There is supposed to be a plan not only for the year, but for the whole cycle, if it's elementary or high school or whatever name they use in the different schools. It is supposed to be coherent, and it is supposed to have a certain level of difficulty that is increasing, and well, different ways to connect. So that is why it's not arbitrary. Like, I mean, you just give this a list of things that you are supposed to cover, but that have no relationship among each other. Non-verbatim means that it's non-memoristic. Yes, and let's say that it has the purpose of integrating new knowledge. Yes, if you take a look at the road, well, it's the opposite. Yes, it's arbitrary. Like, there's not really an order or a real long-term purpose for that. It's usually memoristic, and it doesn't really integrate new knowledge in a long term. Now, it says that there is a deliberate effort to link new knowledge with higher order concepts in cognitive structure, right? So, on purpose, teachers are all the time looking for these connections between the knowledge that is being done, that is being provided, or let's say the conditions that are created in order to be or to have new knowledge. It's deliberate, yes? So it's not accidental. I just don't do things and just prayed for the Virgen de Chiquinquirá to find some connection, right? No, like I really look for ways to create conditions so the student may find some sort of connections between one thing and the other. That is what meaningful learning is supposed to do. Then rote learning, really, if anything happens, it's just by accident, because the effort is not necessarily deliberate. They just somehow in this sort of learning, it has to do with memory. It has to do with certain things that are not deliberately, voluntarily connected. Then, and the next one, it says that learning is related to experiences with events or objects. So experience is really important in meaningful learning. Yes, and let's say that take into account that experience has a lot of different layers, right? So, for example, many people consider that you are not a teacher, or that you are not able to have real experience as a teacher until you arrive into the classroom. And that at certain levels is correct, right? There are no possible way to, for example, deal with discipline, or with organization, or with attention spans. I mean, you have to be there in the classroom, right? Nevertheless, there are a lot of different things that you can do that are experiential and pragmatic, and that doesn't really require an audience, for example. Right? There are a lot of things that you can do on the other way. So all these simulations or situations that we can deal with are part of meaningful learning, right? Now, normally in rote learning, for example, you can learn the concept of an adverb. La palabra que modifica o califica el verbo. Good. You memorize that. But how to use it? Yes? Probably what they normally tell you in rote learning about an adverb is, this is the list of adverbs, learn it, like memorize it, right? So, well, that doesn't really show you, or I mean, you could memorize the whole thing, but that doesn't in the end guarantees that you know what is an adverb and how to use it, right? And finally, affective commitment to relate new knowledge through prior learning, right? Let's say that there is this click that you do when you match one thing with the other, right? When you, with your own, let's say, awareness, or by your own means, you say, oh yeah, so I remember I saw that the former semester. Or I was watching a documentary the other day, and they precisely talk about this. So that is affective. Yes, there is like an emotional connection in there that hopefully makes you feel proud somehow. No, like you say, oh yeah, I knew this. I knew that at some point this was going to be useful, or whatever, right? So there is an affective response. Yes, there is an emotional connection in there. that is supposed to be arising in the middle of the learning. Well, in the rote learning, you don't have connections, you don't really think about it, so the emotional response is, zero, right? Usually. So, meaningful learning sounds wonderful, right? If we compare it with Skinner, and we compare it with the madman of Pavlov and his dogs, and Watson scaring the crap out of the poor kid, well, this seems wonderful, right? Well, still it has like some problems, and there are some things that we're required to do in order to continue, let's say, using the road and memory and different things that are so important. Okay, so that about this we're going to think about it, and that is going to be the assignment number 2. Okay, if you go to the slide number 22, you are going to work on the first and the second questions, right? Please, you're going to be working in groups of 4 people maximum. Again, you can decide if 2, 3, 1. And you're going to try to answer these questions as completely as you can. So try to write at least a paragraph, 5 sentences per question in order to answer. If you're required to write a little bit more, well, that will be fine. That's fine. Okay, so let's take a look at the first one. It says, what are some things that we can learn by rote without reference to cognitive hierarchical organization, right? So what are some things that we can learn effectively, good, because like we can memorize anything, right? But what are some things that we can learn by rote, only by memory, and we don't require to have any hierarchy, any relation, nothing like that, okay? There are not many, but there are some, okay? So try to list a couple of them, 2, 3, or 1, as you prefer, and you are going to write the justification of why that thing can be, that concept, or that practice, or that process, there are many different things, can be learned by rote perfectly, fine. Not necessarily like the meaningful learning. I know that meaningful learning like sounds wow, really great, and it sounds like if we as teachers always needed to do that, and we were aimed to do that. But you will see, if you think it clearly, that there are certain things that are just more complicated that way, and that you can just learn by memory, and that's fine. And think about certain things that right now by heart, and that are really useful to you. Yeah? So think about it and write about it. Then the second one, it says, what are some previous concepts and or propositions you need to learn the concepts of division, photosynthesis, and didactics? Okay? So there are 3 basic concepts. Division, division of numbers. Photosynthesis, that is a biological concept. And didactics, that it's on your area of expertise. Okay, so I'm asking you that what are some things that you need to know before, some prior requirements in order to get the concept of division. So it's impossible to learn division if you don't know before what? What if you don't know, in order to understand photosynthesis, you're required to know the concept or concepts of what? The same about didactics. I even gave you some clues at the beginning, but you can go deeper in there, right? So please divide this in each one of the 3 items for divisions. What are some of the concepts that you require for that before? So we're talking about, in this case, meaningful learning. The first question was about rote. The second was is about meaningful learning. And you make a short description of why do you think that is essential or is very important, okay? So that's it, guys. Thanks a lot. Remember, we will continue talking about Ausubel next week. And that will be it, okay? Thank you very much. Have a great rest of the day, and see you around. Hugs. Bye-bye.